Velkommen til denne siste sesjon av Oslo Symposium og utdelingen av Kåre Kristiansens minnepris. Velkommen også til seerne på Visjon Norge. Spesielt velkommen til representanter for Kåre Kristiansens familie. Og representantene for Simon Wiesenthal-senteret, Simon Samuels og hans kone Graciela. Hjertelig velkommen. Nå ser det jo litt merkelig ut her, hvor talerstolen står på gulvet. Og det fordi at vi så heldige å ha Kåre Kristiansens oldebarn, Jamina Finnanger, som nå vil framføre en dans sammen med sin partner, Martin Lilleberg.
venner, nå vi kommet til et av høydepunktene på Oslo Symposium. Har dere hatt det bra her på Oslo Symposium? Det har vært fantastisk å se så mange komme tilbake. Det noen som har vært her mer enn en gang på Oslo Symposium? Det noen som har vært her mer enn 2 ganger på Oslo Symposium? Det noen som har vært her mer enn 3 ganger på Oslo Symposium? 3 ganger eller mer? Ja, så bra. Det noen som har vært her 4 ganger eller mer? Ja, se på det. Det noen som har vært her på alle Oslo Symposium noensinne? Se på det, fantastisk. Det har vært en festreise fra begynnelse til slutt, og alt har gått omtrent som vi håpet, og det har bare vært en stor, stor glede. Skal vi gjøre det en gang til i 2021? Ja! Vi skal i kveld dele ut Kåre Kristiansens minnepris. Vi tror på å ære de som har gått foran og vist vei i den kristne bevegelsen. Kåre Kristiansen var en sånn, og det en udelt ære at vi får lov til å forvalte denne delen av hans minne, nemlig politikeren, Israel-vennen og kristenhøvdingen Kåre Kristiansen. Kåre Kristiansens minnepris opprettet i samråd og i samarbeid med familien, og vi har også gleden av å ha en representant for familien i minneprisens styre. Vi veldig glad for at familien til Kåre Kristiansen representert her i kveld, og jeg vil be familien om å reise seg så vi får se dere. Kåre Kristiansen var kjent i Norge som predikant, statsråd og leder i Kristelig Folkeparti. Ble den charmerende, skarpsindige og veltalende mann med glimt i øyet en profil i norsk politikk. Men Kåre Kristiansen var kanskje like kjent internasjonalt. Derfor minneprisen også internasjonal. Vedtektene sier at prisen skal gå til en person eller en organisasjon i Norge eller i utlandet som har utmerket seg i kampen for de verdier som Kåre Kristiansen kjempet for. Minneprisen utdeles i år for 5. gang. Den har tidligere gått til Holocaust-museet Yad Vashem, til den israelske soldaten og krigsfangen Gilad Shalit, den svenske pastoren og Aliyah-pioneren Ulf Ekman, og i 2017 til den amerikanske politikeren og TV-personligheten Mike Huckabee. Israel var en av Kåre Kristiansens hjertesaker, kanskje den største. Han pleide omgang med israelske toppolitikere, og han elsket det jødiske folk. For Kåre Kristiansen var forholdet til Israel preget av kjærlighet. Men ikke overfladisk romantikk for et land som han var fascinert av. Han vokste opp med historien om jødene og profetiene om det som skulle komme. Om jødenes hilsen til hverandre gjennom århundrer, neste år i Jerusalem. Og han så dette fra å gå fra en profeti til virkelighet i sin egen levetid. Han levde staten Israels historie, parallelt med sin egen, og så all den uredelighet som etter hvert preget debatten om Israel. Han så hvordan løgn ble gjort til sannhet, og hvordan noe endret seg utover 70- og 80-tallet. Og den selvsagte støtten til Israel og jødene ble satt under tvil. Først og fremst av venstresiden, noen av de som før hadde elsket Israel mest. Han så antisemitismen som han hadde sett i fri utfoldelse foran og under andre verdenskrig komme tilbake til Europa, og han advarte mot den. Han forlot Nobelkomiteen da flertallet bestemte seg for å gi Nobelprisen til Yasser Arafat, en glødende jødehater. For han var det både politisk og personlig. Det ble en samvittighetssak. Hele verden så hans mot og hans tydelighet, og det ikke glemt. Det hadde vært godt å ha Kåre Kristiansen her i dag. Både fordi vi kunne trenge, ja, det vel verdt å klappe for. Både fordi vi kunne trenge hans tydelighet og styrke, men også fordi vi gjerne skulle feiret sammen med han at 2018 ble det store Jerusalem-året. Han samlet underskrifter fra mange tusen nordmenn for å få Norge til å flytte vår ambassade til Israels evige hovedstad Jerusalem. Og i 2018 gjorde USA nettopp det, og etablerte sin ambassade i Israels hovedstad. Og hadde Kåre Kristiansen vært her i dag, hadde han jublet sammen med Israel og med Israels venner. I år skal vi gi Kåre Kristiansens minnepris til en organisasjon som forvalter minnet etter Simon Wiesenthal. Wiesenthal, som var født i Ungarn i 1908, mistet faren i Første verdenskrig og ble arrestert i 1941. Han satt i en rekke leire frem til han ble satt fri 5. mai 1945, da amerikanerne kom til leiren han var fanget i. Da veide han 41 kilo. Bare 3 uker senere overrakte han en liste over krigsforbrytere, for det meste vakter, leirkommandører og Gestapo-medlemmer, til den amerikanske etterretningen. Det ble starten på hans livslange innsats for å føre naziforbrytere for retten. Han gikk av med pensjon i 2003, 94 år gammel. I 1977 ble Simon Wiesenthal-senteret opprettet av hans venn Rabbi Marvin Hiers, som også leder senteret i dag. Wiesenthal-senteret er den mest synlige av de jødiske organisasjonene. De kommenterer hyppig antisemittiske hendelser og har blant annet uttalt seg i forbindelse med saker i Norge. Senest Sør-Trøndelags forslag om boykott av Israel, og ikke minst Jostein Gaardas kronikk mot Israel og jødene i 2006, som han senere beklaget. De siste årene har senteret kjempet mot BDS-bevegelsen, en diabolsk strategi mot Israel og jødene. I aktuelle saker verden over er Simon Wiesenthal-senteret en ledende autoritet i spørsmål om antisemitisme, nynazisme og urett mot jøder og mot Israel. Simon Wiesenthals kamp for å bringe naziforbryterne for domstolen har vært en stor del av Wiesenthal-senterets virke. Og senteret har drevet aktiv ettersøkning av krigsforbrytere og offentliggjort lister over etterlyste forbrytere frem til de siste årene, i det de har kalt Operation Last Chance. Den siste sjansen til å få gjenlevende nazister dømt. Antisemittismen er stigende så godt som overalt. Historien har vist at denne ikke må få vokse, fordi den koster jøder livet. Derfor er det viktig å løfte frem de som kjemper den kampen. Ved å tildele Kåre Kristiansens minnepris anerkjenner vi Wiesenthal-senterets viktige funksjon i kampen mot jødehatet. Ifra å være fokusert på krigsforbrytere har senteret modernisert og aktualisert seg, sånn at det som var den ledende kraft i jakt på naziforbrytere for 10-40 år siden, nå er den ledende organisasjonen i å bekjempe antisemittisme, ikke minst på internett, der dette florerer. Dette er en av vår tids aller viktigste kamper å kjempe. Derfor er det en stor glede å kunne tildele Kåre Kristiansens minnepris til Simon Wiesenthal-senteret. Og det er også en glede å ønske velkommen hit til plattformen for å motta prisen på vegne av Simon Wiesenthal-senteret, internasjonal direktør Shimon Samuels.
Thank you, Beata, and your colleagues, Madam Bachmann, ladies and gentlemen, friends. It's indeed a great honor to receive the Kåre Kristiansen Award, and I'm very excited about this event. This will go to our headquarters in Los Angeles and will be greatly honored. I'm speaking on behalf of an organization that has over 400,000 members around the world, many of whom are Christian Zionists. And I am certain, because I worked for almost 20 years until his death with Simon, that probably Kåre Kristiansen and Simon Wiesenthal would have been great friends. I think that both of them, from what I heard, shared a good sense of humor. And so I would like to perhaps start with a relevant joke. It's about the Israeli father who is taking his son for his bar mitzvah on a trip across Europe. And he explains to him before they leave that most of the people that he'll see, they're not Jewish, they're Gentile. When they get to the Parthenon, the Acropolis in Athens, the child asks his father, Abba, are these people Jewish? And he says, no, I told you, most of the people here are Gentile. The same thing happened at the Colosseum in Rome, and then eventually at the Eiffel Tower in Paris. The boy looks at his father and he says, Abba, I think I can now understand. And I feel so sorry for these Gentiles. They are dispersed all over the world. So everything is a matter of perspective, and we are quite happy that our Gentile friends are dispersed all over the world and growing in many continents, because we need you. We need you desperately. And in the same way, we are deeply concerned with the future and the fate of Christians in the Middle East and beyond. And we are there for them. Our approach to our work is taken from the Passover Seder. And that is that the Lord took us out of Egypt with a clenched fist, Yad Chazakah, and an outstretched arm, Zora Natuya. And this is what diplomats, my wife is a diplomat, they would call this the carrot and the stick. So Simon would often say what starts with the Jews never ends with them. It becomes a scourge for general society. And based in France, we are extremely sensitive to what might be called anti-Semitic terrorism. I would like to just tell you a personal story. We came to Paris in October, in 1980. And in October, it was the Feast of Tabernacles. I was visiting a well-known journalist in the center of Paris. She had a house guest for the weekend. She'd just come in from Israel. Her name was Elisa Chagril. Her husband was a well-known filmmaker in Israel. And she said to the hostess, do you need anything for dinner? And Tamar said, maybe a few dates or figs. I went down in the lift together with Elisa, and I continued straight towards my car. She turned into the Rue Copernic, where she met her death. I didn't hear the bomb, I felt the bomb. It was the synagogue of the Rue Copernic, and the fruit shop was immediately opposite. The following morning, the Prime Minister of France, Raymond Barre, said a most unfelicitous thing. He said that a bomb set for Jews killed 4 innocent Frenchmen. Well, one was a Chinese waiter in the restaurant opposite. The second was a Portuguese delivery boy on a scooter. The third was Elisa, and the fourth was an innocent Frenchman. And Giscard d'Estaing, 4 months later, said, I lost my election in Copernic as a result of that. But Copernic was the first in 2 years of terrorist attacks, shootings and bombings of Jewish targets. It ended in August of 1982 with the so-called massacre of Joe Goldenberg's restaurant. Now the question is, why did it stop? Israel in August of 1982 led an incursion into southern Lebanon in order to break up PLO camps where Western European terrorists were being trained. Those terrorists immediately fled. They came back home. They forgot Jews. They needed money. They attacked banks and military NATO bases and embassies. As a result, the governments cracked down. And we heard no more from Baader-Meinhof in Germany, Action Directe in France, or the Red Brigades in Italy. Yes, Simon was right. What starts with the Jews never ends with them. So excuse me. Yeah, okay. Since then, we've come to a new stage in anti-Semitic terror. It is a stage where not imported terrorists, as in the 1980s, but native-born Islamists, raised in slum belts around Paris and other cities not only in France, And they have transplanted from the Middle East a conflict where they play not cowboys and Indians, but they play Palestinians and Israelis. And who are the Israelis? They are the neighboring Jews wherever they are. And this situation is something which has grown and is now festering, and it's become a pathological epidemic. We, in the Wisdom Center, we don't believe just in protest. We will only intervene where we think that we can change the situation. And as such, we are particularly concerned with the narrative of Christians and of Jews. Now, if somebody could tell me how to turn this on, is that going to work? No? Ah. Okay, so this is a PowerPoint just to give you some idea as to the theft of Jewish identity, the ultimate anti-Semitism, but with it goes Christian identity. So, it doesn't, okay. I'm going to talk about UNESCO, where my wife has been for the last 23 years and is now reaping the lightning and thunder against herself since Israel has left, and so has the United States. The role of the UNESCO World Heritage Committee is to protect and preserve sites of universal value. And back in the year 2000, you may remember, some of you, that the mayor of Oslo, which is the town of Auschwitz, opened a discotheque in the protected zone. I went to Warsaw, spoke with the ministers, nothing doing. They sent me to the governor, still nothing doing. I went to Oslo, and the mayor said, "We have the right to a discotheque." Yeah, you have the right to the discotheque, a dozen of them, but not there. That was in the tannery where the hair was cut. He refused to do anything. We turned to the Heritage Committee, which I thought was meeting in Brussels, but it was meeting in Cairns, Australia. Got on a plane, went down to Sydney, from there to Cairns. There, the chairman of the session was the Finnish ambassador, and I said, "Look, I have 3 minutes as an NGO, which is assistant partner of UNESCO." And he said, "Okay, but it better be good." And I said, well, when I started to speak, I said, "I come from the hell of Auschwitz to the paradise of the Barrier Reef to tell you of the Auschwitz discotheque." And the chairman stopped me and he said, "Those two words in correlation, Auschwitz discotheque, are just too much. Mr. Polish ambassador, we're not asking you or telling you close it." And I had to get back to London for an important meeting. I got back 25 hours later and it was closed. So we saw that the World Heritage Committee had power. And that was extremely important. So what happened later? Well, the German strategist Karl von Clausewitz claimed that war is diplomacy by other means. But since Palestine entered UNESCO with a voracious appetite in November 2011, it's a battlefield. On grounds of emergency, Palestine has annually received Christian and Jewish sites as their heritage. 2012. They didn't have the right to ask for a heritage site for 14 months, but if it was an emergency, as they claimed it was, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Bethlehem and the pilgrim route, they said the roof has been leaking. And the advisory body to UNESCO, ICOMOS, said, "Yeah, it's been leaking for 70 years. Where's the emergency?" But they got it by a stratagem. 2013 in Phnom Penh, Batil, Judaism and Christianity through the Bible, Beitar headquarters for Bar Kokhba's revolt against the Romans, became Palestinian. 2014, the UNESCO Executive Board first gave it, but it was acknowledged, that's Rachel's tomb in Bethlehem, on the way to Bethlehem, as a mosque. Then came in Kiev, the question of Hebron and the tomb of the patriarchs. And all of you know who is buried there. Well, I won't give the list. But I was supposed to speak. This was in Krakow. Krakow. And it was very difficult because I knew that I was standing, you can see there the on the side. I was sitting next to a man, I won't call him a gentleman, next to me, who was the mayor of Hebron years before, and who I received a little piece of paper in my hand. He had personally killed 6 yeshiva boys in the cave. He was sent to jail in Israel, and he was exchanged in the 1097 that were given for one life, and that is Gilad Shalit. And so I tore up my script and I said, look, this man was invited here. He has blood on his hands, which means that UNESCO has blood on its hands, etc. The following year, in Manama, which is Bahrain, they were supposed to ask for the Qumran caves and the Dead Sea Scrolls. This is in the spirit of Jesus being proclaimed as a Palestinian. Well, it didn't happen because suddenly there was an attempt to depoliticize. But rather than depoliticize, it was the strongest resolution on Jerusalem ever and Jewish heritage sites as a war of attrition, increasingly more hostile to Israel. What is the objective of ID theft in the Holy Land? Palestine does not have its own history. It seeks to validation through the theft of Jewish and Christian narratives, and supersessionism is a historical imperative, so that so many people have been deleted from geography and history. In the case of the Jewish people, especially after the Holocaust, delegitimization is a step towards annihilation. Now, what happened was there was an argument, and suddenly the new Director General said, we are going to depoliticize. And she came up with the idea of keeping the violently anti-Israel document, but placing it into a square form of black lines, in blocking it like in a box, and saying, this is an annex. Well, if you go and buy a house or you rent an apartment, usually the annex is considered part and parcel of the document. Any lawyer will tell you that. So what happened is that when finally the document was accepted, because the Foreign Office in Israel was already beginning to consider departure, so you'll see what happened. The whole document was called an annex. This was the program of occupied Palestine. The next one was on the Golan Heights and Israel as a crime against education in the territories. Well, you can see again, the whole thing is an annex. Now, we have produced an exhibition which is called People, Book, Land. It's the Jewish Trinity. Take it out. People, book, or land falls apart. So it's the 3,500-year relationship of the Jewish people with the Holy Land. We wanted it to be the state of Israel, the land of Israel. They wouldn't have that in UNESCO. So the rabbis told me, well, Eretz HaKodesh, Holy Land, fine, we went along with it. So what happened? Palestinians came out with a book, not 3,500 years, 4,000 years of history. Look at the book and look at the last chapters on the Palestine Mandate. It talks about Palestine Airways, created by Jews, run by Jews. Palestine Broadcasting Service, run by Jews. Anybody who was a Palestinian in that period was Jewish. So, let's go beyond it. We monitor book fairs. Very low tech, but it's important. In the Frankfurt Book Fair, I found this on the Lebanese stand, but it was actually Hamas. It's called the Burak Wall. The Burak Wall, as you can see, I don't know if you can see, but you can just read what it says. The Burak Wall is where, according to a Muslim tradition, Muhammad took his horse Burak, which was a winged horse, flew from Mecca to Jerusalem, Al-Quds, the Holy, went up to heaven, spent the night in heaven, came down. He had attached the horse to a wall and then flew back to Mecca. There were no direct flights in those days. You had to go through Jerusalem. So if this is true, then the holiest site for Judaism, the Western Wall, is in fact Palestinian. And that's very clever, because if you look at it on the ground, there is the Holy Basin. And from the wall, there is the Mograbi Mount, and there you find yourself on the temple esplanade. But there is no temple. The temple is called Haram al-Sharif, which means the noble sanctuary with the mosques. Under those circumstances, any non-Muslim who approaches the Kotel, the Western Wall, is in fact trespassing. And that was the objective of this UNESCO agreement. So, the Burak Wall. Now, when we monitor these fairs, and each year we monitor 6 Arab fairs, Abu Dhabi, Saudi Arabia, Casablanca, Cairo, Sharjah, and we take pictures. And as you can see, there are hundreds and hundreds of anti-Semitic books. And we stopped this with the Turks, because the Turks were going to be the honored guest of the Frankfurt Book Fair, and they wanted to clean up. So what the Turks, they used to have, from their 33 stands, most of the stands had anti-Semitic literature. What I do is, I go to the Frankfurt Book Fair. I have an agreement with Jürgen Buss, who is the director, and I go from stand to stand, and where I see a bad book, I put it up next to the number and the name of the publisher. I take a picture, I send it that night to him. The following morning, 2 policemen arrive, and they go from stand to stand, and they confiscate the books to check whether they have indeed violated, not a question of freedom of expression, it violates the contract of the publisher with the book fair. I come the following morning with a journalist, and we go around, and we look, and the book is there where I left it. And so I say to the stand holder, Kunt shortihum, in Arabic, and he said, has the policeman been here? And he says to me, yes. I said, but the book's there. And he opens the card, and he says, I've got 100. So the thing is that this is important. Why? Because we see imams coming to the book fair with their mudaras, their Quranic school students, and they get turned on. More than that, I gave a presentation like this at the European Parliament, and this was some years ago. David Cameron was still the Prime Minister. One of the MEPs was his closest friend, and he provided to David Cameron the fact that these books were no longer just in Arabic, but they were also coming out in French, in English, in German, in Spanish, and they would go first to Muslim schools in countries of those languages, and then from there into high-density Muslim-occupied schools for the general public. So what we do beyond this, David Cameron, 2 weeks later, I watched him on television, he said, we've learned this from the Wiesenthal Center, and as far as we're concerned, we are going to block any one of these books arriving in any school. So good for him. Now, what we do is we give a worst offender award each year. And believe me, there are states that are in competition for this award. Last year it went to Iran, not for anti-Semitism, it was because of the books for children between the ages of 4 and 7 extolling Shahada, martyrdom. And runner-up was Egypt. So this is the way we go, and you can just see Riyadh and Muscat, Doha, Casablanca, and Cairo, and the Frankfurt Book Fairs. Okay? So now, I'd just like to make a few words about our exhibition. This exhibition has now been shown, and it's generally in parliaments. The idea in parliaments is because it's in parliaments where the recognition of Palestine begins. And it's been very successful, despite the fact that for 2 years we were blocked by UNESCO. I don't know if any of you know the name Robert Wistrich, rest in peace. He was the author of this. Among the committee, the honorary committee, we have Elie Wiesel, rest in peace. We have a number of celebrities. I don't know if you know the name Boualem Samsal. If not, you really should read the book, The German Shepherd, which is a wonderful book. He's an Algerian Muslim who is a very good friend of Israel. His closest friend is David Grossman, the writer in Israel. So, I'm almost going to finish, but there are some other important stories that I'd like to give you. We have also a program which is almost unique, and that is both in Latin America and now beginning in Europe. It's called the 11 Points Campaign Against Racism in Sports, particularly football. And in Latin America, football is a religion. There was even a war between Salvador and Honduras. It was called the Football War. So this we now do together with the Organization of American States, a 35-member state organization. We're now working with them on something in Venezuela, which I can't go into at the moment, but you may read about it. In Europe, we're doing it through ECAO, European Coalition of Cities Against Racism, and they have 158 city members, and we also, this is affiliated to UNESCO, so though Israel has left and they left a vacuum, we feel that these are now Jewish issues, they are Christian issues, and we have to fill that vacuum. We also have, when we talk about football, FIFA. Palestine tried to get Israel thrown out of FIFA, which is the International Federation of Football Associations. We managed to stop that and, in fact, turned it around because Palestine names its tournaments and its stadia and teams after terrorists. And we were lucky with this. We needed help, and I have to tell you that the International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem, through the telephone, arranged a group of Swiss, mainly ladies, Christians, who were the branch of the International Christian Embassy. And suddenly the line protecting us from 400 pro-Palestinian agitators cracked. The police couldn't hold them back. And this lady, one of those ladies who on her chain, she had a little Star of David and a little cross, she was arrested and charged with provocation. However, the FIFA is an area where we bring examples of best practices. For example, in Argentina, when there was a lot of screams and monkey grunts from a football team, we got the football tribunal to knock down the points that they had made during the year, which brought them from the first division down to the fourth division. That is now adopted by FIFA as a best practice. So we're making our contributions on very different fronts. We also, Simon Wiesenthal wrote a book. It was called Every Day a Commemoration Day. It's a very, very sad book. So we decided to counter that by a very happy book. And it's called Multi-Faith Calendar, Every Day a Celebration Day. And from January 1 until December 31, every day there is some religion, and this is really for Europeans, some religion that is practicing. Not to behave like my secretaries when they see this calendar, they believe that every day is indeed a holiday, but this we send to mayors, to unions, to the police, to the military, just to give them some idea of what's going on for some of their constituency. Finally, to conclude, some 5 years ago, I was invited for the first time to Iraqi Kurdistan. And in those days, Erbil, the capital, was a center of refuge. It was a wonderful city. It was finally attacked by Daesh or ISIS. But I was invited to Halabja. Halabja was the town which Saddam Hussein had used gas to kill 5,000 people and wound 27,000 in one day. And I had to speak to some 7,600 of the survivors. And I was looking at them and looking across the water, the straits, at Iran, which is bent upon genocidal intent. And I thought to myself, what do I tell these people? And I said, this is not my first time here. I was here 2,000 years ago when we wrote a book, and the book was called the Talmud. And the Talmud has in it a certain, and I'm sure some of you must know it, that is, if I am not for myself, who will be? And if I am only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? Well, it was this, when I said, we are here for you. Of the people sitting in that hall, Congress Hall, in Halabja, 25 years ago, after the gassing, and gas is very meaningful for us, poison gas, they had 5% invalidity if they survived. Today, they have 95% invalidity in their eyes and in their lungs. And our work, not us, but others, took them, it led on to many of them being taken to St. Joseph's Hospital, Jefferson Hospital in Philadelphia for treatment. And what I said, I didn't know it at the time, but it went around the Arab world on television because it was recorded. And this was a very important message for us to make. And the message that we have to make is that what is gas concerns us. What is ill will, what is immoral, what is deadly, concerns us, Jews and Christians. And today we believe that what we call righteous Gentiles, those people that kid asked his father, suggested that they are dispersed all over the world. There are today righteous Gentiles, not just those of the Shoah, the Holocaust. And those righteous Gentiles have to be honored. So each year we take someone to our Hollywood dinner who has done something remarkable. And as I was telling some of us here at dinner, Lassana Patili, some of you may remember the attack on the kosher supermarket in Paris. Upstairs there was a young Muslim from Mali shooting people. He killed 4 people. Downstairs there was another Malian Muslim. He opened the fridge in this supermarket and he put 15 shoppers there. He closed it, turned off the electricity, thereby saved their lives. When we took him to Los Angeles, we took him to the French Lycée school. And he was asked by African French kids, so, Lassana, how does it feel to be French? Because we got him a French passport. And he said, I've been French for a week because of the Wiesenthal Center. But I'm a Malian Muslim. And they said to him, would you do it again? He said, I don't know. But that's the Islam my mother taught me. And I think that that in itself is the message. Righteous Gentiles. And when it comes to Auschwitz, and when it comes to the memory of the Holocaust, Auschwitz must serve us as a lesson and not a precedent. Thank you.
vakkert. Det sånn at vi legger ikke skjul på her på Oslo Symposium at vi henter noe inspirasjon fra USA. Og det liker våre motstandere å henge seg veldig opp i. Det lever vi veldig godt med. Så det sånn at det ikke er alt vi kan hente fra USA, men det er noe vi kan lære. Amerikanske kristne grasrotaktivister, de er veldig flinke til å gjøre det som vi har gjort her, nemlig å reise til landets hovedstad og markere veldig klart og tydelig hva de står for, og invitere politikerne til å gjøre det samme. Og dit kommer de beste politikerne, de beste debattantene og de beste lederne innenfor den konservative bevegelsen. Og så er det jo sånn at i politikken så er det noen som har lært seg hva de skal si for å komme dit de trenger å komme. Det er ikke noe norsk fenomen. Og så har vi noen som er ekte vare, som står for det samme uansett om det blåser i ryggen eller i ansiktet. Som står for det samme enten det er populært eller upopulært. Det er noen sånne juveler i amerikansk politikk, og vi hadde besøk av en sånn her for 2 år siden. Michelle Bachmann er en sånn juvel i Amerika som vi har funnet. Og hun ber ikke om unnskyldning, hverken for sin tro, eller for sine verdier, eller for sin bakgrunn. Disse stemmene er utrolig verdifulle i deres setting, og de er veldig verdifulle for oss også, til å hente inspirasjon og til å lære. Det viser seg veldig ofte når de går ut av politikken, hva det egentlig er som driver de. Og veldig mange de forlater politikken, og så prøver de å kapitalisere og tjene penger på sin politiske kompetanse og de kontaktene og de nettverkene de har. Det har vi i Norge, og de har det ikke noe mindre grad i USA. Michelle Bachmann er ikke en sånn. Tvert imot, hun har bare fortsatt i den kampen som førte hun inn i politikken, som drev hun i de 8 årene hun satt i kongressen og stilte som presidentkandidat, og det driver hun fortsatt, og det er et utrolig forbilde for oss. Det er noe annet vi veldig gjerne har lyst til å formidle og fortelle med dette besøket. Det er nemlig en del av vår historie her i Norge som vi kjenner til, men ikke godt nok. Og det er at på 1800- og begynnelsen av 1900-tallet så forlot over 800 000 nordmenn et fattig land og dro til Amerika. Det er faktisk, ifølge en ekspert som jeg snakket med forleden, det er flere som har norsk avstamning i USA enn det er i Norge. Og de hadde ingenting når de reiste. De hadde kanskje til og med lånt penger til billetten, eller solgt alt de eide for å komme seg til USA. De kom til USA med én ting alene, de hadde med seg troen på Gud. Og de bygget kristne samfunn i Amerika. Og de samfunnene ble foredlet generasjon etter generasjon. Og 3-4 generasjoner etterpå, så lever de fortsatt i dag, og er amerikanere først og fremst, men veldig oppmerksomme på, og veldig glad for at de har et norsk opphav. En av de er Michelle Bachmann. Hennes avstamming er så norsk som den kan bli, like norsk som deg og meg. Hun har steget helt til topps i amerikansk politikk, men historien startet her med de som dro fra Norge, og som hadde med seg troen på Gud, bygget et kristent samfunn, og hun er et produkt av det kristne samfunnet. Og nå er hun tilbake her i gamle landet, for å gi oss en del av den velsignelsen som en gang forlot gamle landet. Vi har vært sammen den siste uken, det har vært en festreise. Vår beundring for Michelle Bachmann, den bare vokser, og vi er så takknemlige for å ha henne her, og vi skal straks få høre fra henne, men først en liten film.
My name is Michelle Bachmann. I'm a former member of the United States Congress and a former candidate for President of the United States. Most importantly, my background is 100% Norwegian. In the 1800s, my ancestors left Norway for the United States. They left poverty and in what was then a struggling nation. They set out for America because it was a land of hope and opportunity. More than 840,000 Norwegians migrated to the United States between 1825 and 1925, a 100-year period, and among them were all my ancestors on both my mother's and father's side of the family. They helped build a Christian community in the United States, and the church was the center of that community. That's the culture I grew up in, and the values of that originated in the Norwegian Christian culture. Those values are with me today. Being in Norway is a coming home for me. Norwegian relatives were kind enough to gather together to meet for the first time. I visited the Amble farm in Kapanger in Sognefjord, where my great-great-grandparents farmed. And I saw the Kapanger Stave Church, where my great-great-grandparents married only months before they left for America on a ship sailing from Bergen, Norway in 1866. I stood before the baptismal font where my great-grandfather was baptized. I stood in the Stave Church built in 1140, where my ancestors formed their faith. I'm at home and among friends here in Norway. I'm delighted to speak at the Oslo Symposium, celebrating the Christian values that built my family and built my nation in the United States and built my fatherland here in Norway.
Until you find your way back home.
I was born in Waterloo, Iowa, in the central part of the United States and a little bit north. It is heavily Norwegian. And so when I was a little girl growing up, all I knew was a Norwegian background. Everyone I knew was a Norwegian background. And the connection was the little Lutheran churches that we went to. Our identity and our pride was in our Norwegian heritage. My parents, their grandparents, the great-grandparents, the family stories, if you will, because we would usually get together on Sundays after church. We'd go visiting and visit it in different people's houses. And the stories inevitably went back to family. And it went back to this one came from that part of Norway, or this one came from there. And our habits were the same. My mom said that the first question that was asked by her parents when she brought my dad home is, number one, is he Norwegian? That's what everyone wanted to know. And number two, is he Lutheran? And if he checked both of those boxes, they didn't care anything about him. As long as he was Norwegian, as long as he was Lutheran, that's all that mattered. The Bible was something that was reverenced in our home. And I think a big part of what I saw throughout not just our family, but I'm thinking of the extended family, the church family, what we saw lived out, the value expressions that came out of a belief and an understanding in Christ and in the Bible was the expression of really the observances of the 10 Commandments. My parents didn't have a great marriage. They did divorce when I was about 13, 14 years of age. And when that happened to our family, we went to below poverty overnight. It's very common in divorce that there's a reduction in the standard of living, and that happened with us too. We went from middle class. My dad had been an engineer. And when that happened, we lost everything, lost our home, lost the possessions inside the home. I took up babysitting jobs, and my brothers delivered newspapers. My grandma would drive up every now and then, and in her back seat, she had canned goods that she had bought. So she would supplement the amount of food we had. And so all through high school, we just didn't have anything. My mom owned 3 dresses. That's what she had. And I had very little clothing too. The one thing my mother did say when I was 13, she said, one thing that can never be taken away from you is your education. So you really need to study hard and you need to do well in school. And so I listened to her, and I did very well in school, and I always worked through school. And so I worked, did very well, and got myself through high school, through college, through law school, through a postdoctorate degree in tax law. And that was something that gave me a heart of compassion for other kids who had lost things. So we ended up taking 23 foster children into our home over the years. because the Lord broke our heart for other people in those kind of situations. About 2000, I ran for the state senate, and it was because of our foster children, because I saw what was going on in America's public schools. And I was very worried about what I saw my foster daughters bringing home in their backpack. I knew that they wouldn't get a strong academic education, and I felt if any child needed a leg up in this world, it's a foster child. Because of that, I ended up in politics, and ultimately, I never in a million years would have thought it, but I ended up running for president of the United States. And so to this date, I am the only woman who has ever run for the Republican Party nomination for the presidency. I was in 15 televised debates. I'm the only woman yet to date on the Republican side that's ever won a presidential contest. I served on the Intelligence Committee, so I had dealt with national security and foreign affairs on that committee. We dealt with the classified secrets of the United States. So I traveled around the world quite a bit dealing with this issue of terrorism, particularly Islamic-inspired terrorism. Barack Obama was very much lifting up the Muslim Brotherhood during the years that he was president. And from my perspective, the Muslim Brotherhood is the umbrella organization of about 70 different terrorist organizations. And I was instrumental in trying to expose the influence of the Muslim Brotherhood, not only globally, but here in the United States, and unfortunately, in particular, in the Obama administration. There's a lot of influence of the Brotherhood there. And I am grateful that I was willing to do that, because the easiest thing to do to stay in public office is to say nothing and do nothing. But that isn't the way that I went. The way that I went was to move the ball down the road in a way that would expose a lot of things that would be dangerous for a lot of people. And so I've done 3 things since I've left Congress. And one of those is that I have been a speaker. And so I speak a lot around the United States and around the world on a lot of different topics. I've been a part of a ministry for about 1.5 years at the United Nations. And so we've tried to bring biblical principles into the United Nations and also bring the gospel in particular to individuals there as well. So that's been something I've been a part of. And then another effort I've been a part of is the Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast. We've been going out and meeting with leaders across the world. God's miraculously opened up these doors of opportunity. And we've presented not only the gospel to leaders of nations, kings, prime ministers, presidents, and so we've literally gone to leaders of nations that are Christian-oriented nations, but also Muslim-oriented nations, more atheistic-oriented nations. And we've talked to them about the gospel. We've prayed for them, these leaders, and we've also talked to them about Israel and about this idea of maybe opening up an embassy in Jerusalem. So it's been interesting how for all of us, God uses the entire tapestry of our life for his kingdom. He is an amazing God, and the one thing I know from the book of Jude, it says that he holds us in the palm of his hand. And I have certainly found that that is true. No matter what our circumstances, he loves us, he has a plan for us, and he uses us to advance his kingdom.
Mine damer og herrer, det en stor glede å ønske velkommen. It's my great joy to welcome Michelle Bachmann.
Thank you, Bjarte. Thank you to the Oslo Symposium. Thank you all for coming here and giving this time this evening. Thank you also to the television audience and to those who are joining us by the internet and through streaming as well. We thank you. I must say, as a person who has the DNA of a Norwegian coursing through my veins, it is a pleasure for me to be home tonight here in Oslo, Norway. When I was a little girl growing up, my dad had stationery made up, and on it, it said the world is divided between those who are Norwegian and those who wish they were. And that was very clear evidence of what it was like to grow up in our community. My forebears, as Bjarte told you, emigrated from Norway. And we were always told from the time that we were little that we were 100% Norwegian. And we should be so proud of our Norwegian heritage. Everything was Norwegian. The food was Norwegian. Our celebrations were Norwegian. Everything we heard about. Even my mother used to sing a song to us that I don't know the words, but when we were little kids, one of the first songs that she taught us was Paul sine hunna på haugen på slapsa på hund. So that's the song that we learned when we were little kids. We had no idea what it meant. Someone later told me it was about hens on top of a roof. That's what I heard later. But just to give you that background, that's what we knew, is that Norway was a very special place, and we should be proud of it. And so what did I know about Norway? What I knew about Norway is who my grandparents were and who my great-grandmother was. She was born in the early 1870s, but I knew her because she lived a very long life. And when I was a little girl, I went to the Lutheran nursing home that was established by Norwegians in northeastern Iowa to visit her. And I saw, as I knew her and saw her, I was also touching the world of the 1870s. And I was touching her world of her parents and her grandparents and her great-grandparents that she knew, reaching back as far as 1800. Because you see, we are all links on a chain. Every one of us are links on a chain. And the chain in my family, the artifacts we saw growing up in Iowa and Minnesota and the great Midwest in America, we saw the artifacts of the wooden trunks painted in rose mauling, often with a date. Or we saw a Norwegian sewing box. I never understood that it was a sewing box until I thought it was a candy box. And finally, I asked, and they told me it was a sewing box where you push these two things and took the lid off. We saw the rose mauling of wooden spoons that they would eat with, and various lace that they made, and this was Stavanger lace, and this was a different kind of lace. And of course, every Christmas there would be lefse, and then we all hid because there would also be lutefisk, and no one wanted to eat the lutefisk, but there always had to be lutefisk. There wasn't a day of my life that there wasn't a jar of herring, pickled herring, in the refrigerator, and my mother couldn't get enough of it. This was our world, and this was our life. And my mother told me that when she grew up in northeastern Iowa, the church that she went to was in the Norwegian language. She was born in 1931. And so her church was all Norwegian language. They sang the Norwegian hymns. They read from the Norwegian Bible. Norwegian newspapers were delivered to the house. And when she grew up, she actually was a foster child herself. She was taken in by a Norwegian couple that owned a farm in northeastern Iowa, very strong believers. And they paid for her, a girl growing up in the Depression. No one had ever gone to college in our family, not one. But this couple paid for her to go to Luther College in Decorah, Iowa, a college that was created by Norwegian immigrants. First of all, to prepare ministers of the Bible who would go out and preach among the Norwegians in that area, but then also professions. My mother went to the school, and at that time you could go to college for 1 year and earn a teaching certificate and then teach in country schools. And if you taught in the schools for 3 years, then you were given a full license and you could be a school teacher. The values that were taught by our very modest grandparents, my two grandmothers both were factory workers, and yet one of my grandmothers every day subscribed to the Wall Street Journal, and she read the Wall Street Journal from cover to cover every day. She subscribed to Time magazine. a weekly news magazine. She read that magazine every week, cover to cover. She was the most well-read, literate person I had ever met in my life. People loved coming to her home because she could carry a conversation on any topic, and she did. She was a very engaging, charismatic individual, but she was a very modest person. But the other thing I knew about her is that every Sunday she was in church, not just as a participant, but she taught Bible classes to adults at their Lutheran church in northeastern Iowa. And this was back in the early 1960s. One thing that she desired more than anything else was to be able to someday go to Israel. Now, this is the 1960s. Israel had only been established in 1948. Israel wasn't even 20 years old. This was a factory worker living in a very poor part of town. She had absolutely nothing, but the one thing she wanted to see in her life was Israel. And so she put the money away, and she was very careful, and she saved, and she had enough money to go to Israel. And of all the pictures she brought, she was well-dressed every day when she went on that tour. She was so proud that she could get over to the land of Israel. Why? Because as she studied the Bible, she saw the number one character in the Old Testament is God. The number two character in the Old Testament is Israel. Because God has a story, the story of mankind that he played out through a specific people to put them in a specific land for a very specific purpose. Because you see, our story is all the same. Even though we are proud Norwegians in this world, in this room, and I am one of them. My brother took the Ancestry.com DNA test, and I want you to know the results came back a couple of weeks ago, and he is 93% Norwegian from the Kaupanger area in Sognefjord. So we found out that our parents weren't lying to us after all. We really are 100% Norwegian, and we are proud of it. But every one of us, whether we are Norwegian or whatever we are in our background, we all go back to the beginning story. The beginning story that is so faithfully recorded in a book that is above all books. In a book that is faithful and true, in a book that we put our trust, in a book that is proved true and faithful over and over again. It is written by the finger of a loving God, the Creator who made each one of us. In this book, we find that God made his highest and best creation, Adam and Eve. And when he made this creation, he placed them in this very perfect world, in a loving environment where everything was pure and life was good. And God said to them, enjoy everything I have made for you. Enjoy everything, eat of everything. There's only one thing you must not do, and it's this. You must not eat from the tree of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. And why was that? It's because all Adam and Eve had ever known was life. They had known life and perfection and a relationship with him. And if they would eat of that tree of the knowledge of good and evil, then they would know sin and they would know death. And a loving God wanted to keep them from that reality. This isn't a fairy tale. This is reality. Because you see, every one of us in this room are born in the same condition. We are born in a state of disobedience and sinfulness to God. That is what the Bible tells us. But God, even with Adam and Eve, at that very moment of sin, he didn't abandon mankind. At that very moment, he said, I have a plan for you. Because you see, Satan wanted to bruise the heel of God And God said, I will crush the head of Satan. And so he did. And the way that he did that is he chose an individual, a man named Abram from Ur of the Chaldees in southern Iraq. And he said to Abram, Abram, come to a land that I will show you. And Abram brought Sarai, his wife, and Lot, his uncle, and Terah, his father. And he brought them. Terah died, but the rest of them came to this land that he gave them, Canaan. And in this land of Canaan, it was an evil land at that time. But God said to Abram, of you, Abram, I will make a people and a nation. And this is the land that you will have. And God then described the parameters of that land. We don't need to guess what this land is. God has given to us the very deed, the one deed that God wrote was the land that he gave to his chosen people. And why did he choose them? Because from this very people would come Messiah, would come the Redeemer of all of mankind, so that the sin that happened in the garden would be covered. And once again, all of mankind could then come back and be in right relationship with God. Because you see, no price could be paid. Not one of us. There wasn't one thing that any of us could do. There wasn't one thing that Adam could do, or Eve could do, or anyone could do to buy their way into heaven. They could never be good enough. Life isn't like a pan balance, where if you do more good things than bad things, that's how you get into heaven. That's it. That isn't it at all. If that was it, we wouldn't need Messiah. But we need Messiah because no one could ever pay that debt. And God gave us the understanding of how we come to him through Abram. It's written in the book of Genesis. It says this, and what is true for Abram is true for all of us. It says that Abram believed God, and that belief was accounted to him as righteousness. It isn't that Abraham did something. It's that God sovereignly chose him. And then Abram, by faith, believed a holy God and believed his promises, that one day God himself would humble himself and come as Messiah to redeem us from our sins. That is the story. And Abraham believed. And for all time and for all people, whether from the east or from the west, the Bible is needful. And the Bible is true for those in the east. It's true for those in the west. It's true for those in the south. It's true for those in the north. That message of the Bible, of redemption, if you look from Genesis all through the Bible, the message is the same. It is the message of a loving God of redemption to call us back to him. That message came given, the law was given through Moses, and the Jewish people faithfully throughout history carried the law to benefit all of mankind. God spoke to the prophets, and he gave the law. And when we looked at the law and the prophets, that showed us what the future would be and how we were to behave and how we were to live. From there, Christians believed that Messiah came into the world, and that from Messiah, as he lived a perfect sinless life, then gave his life willingly on the cross. He gathered during his 33 years of life on this earth 12 people, the apostles, who he poured his life into. And upon his death on the cross, after living a sinless life and then coming back to this world where he preached and was seen by many, at one time 500, then he ascended into heaven to sit on the right hand of the Father, to wait and to prepare a place for us. And he said, I will go to that place, and I will give you my Spirit to be with you. His precious Holy Spirit, that Spirit of God. God is one. Father, Son, Spirit, one. Indivisible, one. He gave us his Spirit to speak to us, to guide us, to comfort us, to teach us, and to bring us into all knowledge and understanding of who he is, to guide us. That Spirit of his and those disciples and those apostles then went across the world, from Jerusalem to Judea to Samaria to the uttermost parts of the earth. And they shared the truth of his kingdom, and they turned the world upside down. In 1030, for 11 years from now, just think, 11 years from now, it will be the 1,000th anniversary of this message coming here to the Northland, to Norway. 1,000 years ago. That is a date worth honoring, memorializing, remembering. 11 years from now, I encourage all of you at the Oslo Symposium and all Norwegians to pause and be thankful for the greatness of this living word that came into this land of freedom through doing what Abram did, believing God and having that alone by faith be accounted to us as righteousness. That message came in to southwest Norway and began spreading all across Norway. A biblical basis and a belief in the Bible. This land, as you know better than I, was worshiping false gods. The very first commandment that God gave to Moses was this: I am the Lord thy God, who brought thee out of Egypt. Have no other gods before me. In Norway, there was worshiping of other gods, of false gods. And that had an impact on the people that lived here in Norway, the worship of false gods. When the worship of the true God came, the living God came into Norway in 1030, that began to change this land. And as mighty as the granite mountains are in Norway, that stone, so too were the hearts of the people. The stony hearts, God miraculously turned into hearts of flesh as they began to believe like Abram did, believe in this God of the Bible. And this land of Norway began to change and develop in a way that it hadn't before. When you saw from the video that we were in Kapanger in Sognefjord, when we stood in the stave church, the largest stave church in the world, that was my family's church. When we stood in that church, built in 1140, and I realized the wood that I'm looking at, the interior of this beautiful church that I am looking at, this is the original church. These are the walls. This is all the original building that was put up by faithful believers in 1140 AD. Christianity came to Norway 110 years earlier. And then the guide told us, but this wasn't the first church built on this site. There were 2 churches built before. So almost from the very beginning of this new biblical belief coming to Norway, a church was built on that very site in Kapanger. And the way that buildings were erected at that time, if you've been to that area, it's tall, beautiful pine trees, strong pine trees. At about 110 years of age, they can be used for building. They grow as old as 250 years. They're strong, almost strong like iron. And so the early Norwegians, when they were erecting the churches, they put them directly into the soil. Well, of course, they rotted. They didn't stand. That's why there were 2 churches. But they were given a special understanding, as Norwegians do. They're brilliant people, and they figured out a new way to build. And so they built with stones a foundation, a firm foundation. And in the stave church, they created almost like what we would call a Lincoln log or a tinker toy. They had a locking system where they built a building so strong that it could last 900 years. 900 years. How is that possible? What's even more profound is that they built a faith that lasted 900 years, almost 1,000 in this land. Each one of us in this room, each one of us watching by television or by internet, must be profoundly grateful that this great nation has been impacted by a biblical basis for nearly a millennium. Because of that faith, because of the truth and the freedom that comes from that faith, the people of Norway were a free, independent people with free, independent spirits, living as free men before a holy God. They profoundly took into their minds, into their hearts, into their spirit, the truth of the Bible that was preached by those who came in to give the truth of the Bible. Originally, it was the Catholics who came in. And then when the Reformation spread across Europe through Martin Luther, then the Norwegian church was impacted by reform. Lutheranism was then adopted in a major shift in Norway. There was an effort to read the word for the pride and the self and the betterment of the common man, so that the common man could understand the words and the truth of what the Bible says for himself, for herself. What Martin Luther called the priesthood of all believers, that there is no intermediary between God and man. And we could know his love. We could know his forgiveness. We could know his peace. We could know his assurance directly for ourselves, just as Father Abraham himself understood for himself. He walked with God. He walked with man. That is the heritage of this nation, to have hearts of stone turned to hearts of flesh. That began in 1050 and moved forward through the centuries. That stave church survived the Black Plague. That stave church survived leprosy. All that happened in Norway. And yet, as people are, we have times of periods of being closer to God, periods of being farther away from God. So too revival came through this land. I also had the privilege this week of going and visiting the birthplace of Hans Hauge. And I saw where he was born in 1771. I saw where the area where he was in the field when God sovereignly spoke to him, just like God sovereignly spoke to Father Abraham and called him to be a precious people in a precious land for the purpose of being a blessing to all the nations. So too, Hans Hauge was called by God. He was changed, and he was called to speak to Norway, one of the poorest countries in the world, to speak to them about entrepreneurship, creating jobs, and to spread the freeing message from the Bible, that we could be released from the power of sin over us. No longer to be captives, now to be set free. He changed Norway so much. The population was 900,000 in the time of Hauge. And yet he wrote 42 different books. 500,000 of Hauge's books were in the hands of 900,000 Norwegians. Think of this. There was nary a home that wasn't impacted by this man, who was impacted by the same Spirit of God that impacted Father Abraham and through believers through the centuries. And Hauge went across this great land of Norway and preached, as did others. Rosinius was another one who went across Norway, who put together congregations, and Hauge put together prayer houses because the Danish church wouldn't allow him to preach in a church. And so for 10 years he preached across this nation and turned it upside down, as the disciples had turned up the world upside down. He was a bother to the state church, and so they jailed him for 9 years of his life. But Norway needed his entrepreneurial skills. They needed to know how to create salt so that it could preserve the food so they wouldn't starve. And so the government let him out. He was very sick when he got out, but he used his skills, and he changed Norway because he changed the people of Norway, because he changed the hearts of Norwegians. But it wasn't he who did it. It was the Spirit of God who transformed the Norwegians as God had transformed Hauge. That was by the early 1800s. The Hauge movement went forward, as you know, all through the 1800s. Lives were changed, the economy grew, and then immigration started. In 1825, the big immigration started out of Norway. I asked those who were in Sognefjord when I was there, what was it? Was it a potato famine? No, they said. There were so many people. Norwegians were fertile. They were having a lot of children. But the land couldn't support the people because, as you know, less than 3% of the land produces food in Norway. There just wasn't enough for all the people. And so the people began to emigrate. They started in 1825, but it really wasn't the big wave. In 1862, the United States President, Abraham Lincoln, was in the midst of the Civil War. Our war went from 1860 to 1865. But Abraham Lincoln did something very profound. He signed what was called the Homestead Act. And with the Homestead Act, there was an effort to have Americans move west, but there weren't enough Americans to fill all of this great land of America. And so we needed more people. And so the Homestead Act was passed. It was available to anyone who came to America. That news was quickly telegraphed to the people of Norway, who were in the process of leaving and emigrating out, looking for a better land. They were filled by faith. They were filled with the impact of Hauge. And so these Norwegians saw this, my relatives included. And in 1866, my great-grandfather, Anfinn Amble, was born. His parents, Christina and Niels Amble, also who were married at the Stave Church, they left from Bergen, Norway on May 5th of 1866. They spent 1 month in what could have only been a horrific sailing journey across the Atlantic to get to Quebec, Canada, and then make their way down eventually to Minnesota, where I live, and to Iowa. That's my father's paternal family. My mother's family came from the Lillehammer area. They came and they had nothing. We know that because of their own records. They had absolutely nothing. Everything they had was sold just to get a ticket to get across to the New World. So they hired themselves out as hired hands. They took advantage of the Homestead Act because, you see, the offer was 160 acres for free if they cleared the land and lived the land and worked the land and produced on the land for 5 years' time. What a bargain for most Norwegians. They couldn't wait to do that, and that's what they did. And so when you come to America, whether it's New York City or Wisconsin or Minnesota or Iowa or North Dakota or South Dakota or Seattle, Washington or California or so many other areas, 840,000 Norwegians made an impression on this nation. During the Civil War, measurements were made of every soldier. My great-grandfather served in the American Civil War. Right after he got off the boat, from Norway. They took the measurements of the soldiers, of all soldiers in the Civil War. The Norwegians were the tallest, they had the biggest chests, they were the strongest. They even changed the makeup of the American population because they were so big and so strong. But the most important impact that the Norwegians made in the United States was the faith that they brought to the United States of America, influenced by Hauge, influenced by the believers from years and decades and hundreds of years before that had come into this land. We have the artifacts. We have the wooden trunks. We have the rose mold dishes. But what is more precious is that we have their faith. We have their faith and the way that their transformed lives came into America. And the way that they came in, not demanding from the American government, you must give me something. They came into America and said, what can we do? How can we serve? Like my great-grandfather, who immediately joined the Union Army and fought for the end of the abolition of slavery. That's what Norwegians did when they came to the United States. The first thing that any Norwegian community did was erect a church. The very first thing they did. And if you come to visit all across the Midwest, you will see white wooden churches looking very much like a stave church, only painted, all across the Midwest, because that was the center of their world. They built the church, and then they had to have ministers for the church, so they built colleges, one that my mother had attended. They built up these colleges. Then they built up Lutheran social services. They needed insurance, and so they got together and formed an organization called Lutheran Brotherhood. The old people needed care, so they built Lutheran nursing homes, where my grandmother went and many other elderly Norwegians. They built every possible social service that was needed. Not once would they go to government and ask government, local, state, or national, to supply their needs. They were thrilled to be able to work, and then they banded together as a community. They were not selfish people. They were among the most generous people you have ever met. In the state of Minnesota, where Norwegians, as Bjarte said, are overrepresented in our state, we have the reputation of being one of the most charitable, philanthropic, generous states in the United States. That comes from a Norwegian heritage. It comes from that hard work ethic, and it comes from the belief in the values of honesty and thrift and working for your fellow man. When I grew up, we never locked our doors in our community. No one locked our doors. We didn't need to. Who would come in? No one would come in. It was a community that understood each other and did what it was supposed to do. You see, I was so humbled when I came back here this week. I'm the first generation since Christina and Niels and baby Anfinn left from the dock at Bergen. I'm the first generation that came back. Because you see, Norway to us was like Pluto or Jupiter. I mean, it was like somewhere far away in the solar system. We were not wealthy people. We could never imagine having enough money to come to Norway. But it was something that we always looked up to because we knew it had given us so much. And so now this week when I came here, I learned even more importantly how real this faith is that was built here in Norway. You see, the Norwegians, when they sent 840,000 people to the United States, they sent, unbeknownst, 840,000 missionaries into the United States who built up communities and helped to create what it today is known as American greatness. They made America great. They sacrificed, they did but generation upon generation upon generation upon generation, they faithfully transferred that biblical understanding first known by our father Abraham. They're faithful people and faithful still. Not all. By any stretch of the imagination, I don't want to say that all knew that God of the Bible. But there's an overwhelming umbrella, an overwhelming sense that they brought with them. It was a biblical-based understanding, and the values and the way that they lived were informed by those values. As the United States has reflected those biblical values, we have been lifted up to what today is the economic and military superpower of the world. But as we reject those biblical values, you also find a deflating of that great strength. That's true in America, just as it's true in Norway. And so I say to you, I look at our ancestors. I look at our forebears. I look at the boldness with which they lived life, the boldness that they took on to leave everything behind, and you saw for yourself the most beautiful land on earth, Kapanger, Sangjefjord. How disappointed they must have been when they got to Minnesota and Iowa, and it was all flat. But what they did get was rich soil that could help make them rich when they added their hard work and their godly values. I'm here to say thank you. Thank you to Norway. Thank you to the faith of this great nation. Thank you to nearly 1,000 years of a godly heritage that this nation would be remiss not to celebrate for the next 10 years. You see, what would Norway have been if it had been left to the worship of pagan gods under the Vikings? What would any nation be if it rejects what Father Abraham embraced? We see that evidence across the world. And that's why for every one of us listening to this message, we too have that choice. We either accept that message given to Abraham, who believed God and it was accounted to him as righteousness, or we reject it. The choice is ours. The choice is for Norway, the choice is for the United States, but it comes down to the choice of the individual. When enough individuals in a nation believe as Father Abraham believed, then that nation becomes righteous before a holy God, and a people rejoice. God bless you, and thank you for allowing me to be here this evening.
Ja, dette avslutter da Oslo Symposium 2019. Men før vi går, så det på tide med en eller flere takk. Takk først og fremst til dere deltagere som gjør Oslo Symposium mulig og nødvendig. Takk til dere som ser på gjennom TV og streaming, som også gjør Oslo Symposium nødvendig. Takk til alle talere og frivillige, møteverter, vakter, tolken Erik Jensen, som ingen har sett, men mange har hørt. Først og fremst, takk til Jesus Kristus. Skaper, frelser og opprettholder av alt liv. Tusen takk for denne gang, og velkommen tilbake i 2021. Vel hjem!
Ja, det var ikke